Welcome to the What's Wrong with Wolfie podcast. This episode is twinned with Sonic the Comic the podcast. Population 2, creating a great amalgam of 90s podcast to the absolute extreme max.
Greetings and welcome to What's Wrong with Wolfie. My name is Jason.
And I'm Rich.
And I'm Chris.
And this time it's the magazines and comics of the 1990s. And at the top of the show, as always, I would like to give a massive shout out to our supporters Andrew and Tristan. Thank you so much, guys. You are amazing people. And if you would like to do the same, you can join the Wolfie Club, where you can join a membership starting from just £1, or you can just give us a one-off donation to the show. Head on over to buymeacoffee.com/thewolfiepod to see all the options. Now, welcome to another Discusses episode, and today we're going to have a chat on the magazines and comics of the 90s, a magical thing for us as kids, entertaining us with some amazing stories in our comics, and informing us and keeping us up to date on our favourite hobbies through magazines. Pre-internet, this was the only way we could do this. And in this show, we are going to discuss some of our favourite comics and magazines, and we're going to do this with the help of Sonic the Comic's very own, Sonic the Comic podcast's very own, Dave Bulmer. Welcome
Hello,
to the
everybody.
show, mate.
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
Sonic the Comic, the podcast. I am not affiliated with the official comic because I was a small boy.
Welcome. How are you doing, mate? You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. I haven't prepared an answer to that, so I have to think about what's been going on with me. Everything's fine. I had COVID a little while ago, but I'm fine now.
Excellent.
Oh.
Great news.
Well,
Yeah, half
Not
of it.
on getting COVID, but
Okay.
on recovering it from it. That's what I meant.
Yes. Yes, I'm Dave, and I'm from a podcast about one of these comics that we're going to be talking about today, and also general internet silly man. I don't know you guys. Like,
No.
I've heard bits of your podcast now and then, but hi.
Hello.
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 The magic of podcasting, where
Yeah.
we talk to people you don't really know, but you really
That's
want to
the
talk to them.
thing. Exactly, that's the thing. According to my thing here, you're all called Jason.
Is that right?
Yeah, every single one of you is coming through a single feed called Jason.
Oh, okay. Well, that's magical. I never knew it did that. Is that what it does? Because I have a different
Yeah.
screen on my laptop, so
All I've got is myself and Jason. I haven't got all the other guests we've had on.
It's not a heavy rain podcast, okay? So
No.
it's not just Jason everywhere.
I haven't cloned myself. Don't worry, people.
So I've done some sleuthing. I've just found out you're called Jason with my sleuthing. I'm a mega detective.
This is going to be a good one. It's going to be good. But before we do anything
Sorry for
else,
doxing you, Jason.
Before we do anything else, though, I have one question to ask. The one that's on the tip of everyone's tongue. The one that's put everyone on the edge of their seat. It is, of course, what's in your glass, Rich?
Oh, I'm drinking a citrus radler from Top Rope Brewery. It's called Shandy Savage.
Just-
Yeah, it's beautiful. The notes say, in need of serious refreshment, yeah, you need a radler that's cream of the crop. Starting with a light wheat beer base, we've added the mega powers of lemon and lime to give you a hit of citrus flavours. Ooh, yeah! Dig it! And then, it's 2.5%, and it says it's best drank while watching Randy Savage versus Bret Hart from Saturday night's main event 13. So
That's one of the most specific beers we've ever had on that segment.
It's
It's nice.
amazing.
I'm not a Radler fan, but this is very, very drinkable. I'm enjoying it. So, yeah, lovely.
Did you say it was a 2.5%?
Mm-hmm.
That's very low for you.
By far the lowest I've ever had.
He's on the shandy, isn't he?
But yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah.
The clue's in the title, I guess, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Does that appeal to you, Dave? Is that,
Me?
Mm.
I don't know. I wasn't listening. I was just thinking about whether or not I wanted to go and get a drink. Turns out I had something in my glass. That's all I was. That is all I was dedicated. If you said beer, then I'm not interested.
Okay.
Was it a beer?
It was a beer, yeah.
You see, no, I can't. I don't know what it is about my tongue, but I can't do them. I can't do beer.
No,
I know.
appreciate
I've tried my dad's one of these real ale fan guys. He's like, oh yeah, I'll try this. He tries whatever the local beer is, wherever he happens to be. He'll try that. And I always have a sip of his if I'm there. But no, I don't. I wish I'd trained my mouth that way, because I know there's a rich world out there to be had of for some reason, wanting to drink a savoury drink.
If that was the case, you too could have a what was it? A brandy shandy.
Shandy Savage.
Oh, sorry, Shandy Savage.
Randy Savage.
Shandy's a bit different to beer, isn't it? That's a different thing. I remember, was it Shandy? I think they used to. Right, this is something I've said for years, and everyone goes, "Are you sure?" And I don't know if this is true or not, but this is as I remember it. They used to sell shandy at my school's canteen, and this is the school from between the ages of 11 to 14.
Are we talking Bass Shandy?
I couldn't possibly tell you because I didn't dare get one. I was like, well, I'm not gonna. I'm only a little boy. I'm not gonna have that. But meanwhile, friends of mine are like, yeah, I've got a shandy. I've got a can of shandy. I don't know why. It must have just been lemonade or something. I don't know.
Yeah, like kids when you get was it cider flavoured ice lollies?
But it said shandy on it. That was the thing on the can, and it didn't say mock shandy, and it didn't say anything like it. Just said shandy. Maybe it might not be shandy. It might be another word, but I think it was.
No, you're definitely right, Dave, because I remember it myself, and I always remember looking on the back of the can, and like really small light, and it would say like alcohol percentage, and it was like 0.005% or something.
That's right, but that didn't make me go, oh, okay. That made me go, what? It actually is? It's actually got alcohol in it, and Gary's just come up with a can of it, and he's drinking it in front of me now. There's teachers, dinner ladies can see him.
Yeah, exactly. I had the same kind of feelings.
We'll find your school in the good pub guide. Seriously, it's amazing. Check with your dad. He might have it. He might be in his latest camera publication.
Yeah, the camera book. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, well, amazing beer, amazing story. I don't know where we want to go from there. Let's get some questions to you, Dave, and we wondered if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your gaming history.
My gaming history, all right, okay. My gaming history begins sometime in the 1980s. One of my very first memories is squeezing between the slats of a garden fence, going round the next door neighbour's house, and sitting down on their sofa to watch them play Three Blind Mice. And all I remember is these mice going up and down on the screen. I've looked this up online, and it seems to be true. There is a game of Three Blind Mice on some old machine where the pixels were the size of a car, and it just plays this awful rendition of Three Blind Mice all the way through. And I think you're a cat going around a maze, or a mouse running away from the cat going around the maze, one of them. But so that was where it all began. And I was just always interested, because to me they were magic. Games were magic, and I came from a time just before they became like something that everyone had in their house normally, and I lived through a time where some people did, you know what I mean? Just when I was at primary school, that was developing. So when I was very little, they were like, it was the equivalent of just being able to command what was on TV. Mm-hmm. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And so we got a ZX Spectrum when I was about 5. I always think it was 6, because I always think of myself as having been already installed in school. But I think it was when I was 5. There's evidence of this that keeps popping up. So it must have been just as I was starting school that we got this thing. And I've, if anyone wants to know more about it, I've done a quite extensive video about the first game I ever had on my YouTube channel, which is called Demon Tomato Dave. And it's called Dave's First Game. And if I may say so myself, I think it is a good video and you'll quite like it. But it's all about how, in those days, being a small child and seeing these pixel people, these little mosaic things moving about on the screen, was more than there's no way to understand it if you just are like someone who's used to more modern games, and then you see an early 80s game now. What you do is you go, oh, those are primitive graphics. But that was not what I was seeing. I was seeing the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life. I wasn't fooled into thinking the graphics were like realistic or anything. It was totally different to that. It was like, what am I looking at? And couple that with a very young brain, and you start to get this idea of the world you're looking at in the screen, and therefore maybe the world that exists outside of it, where things can be completely, sincerely weird in ways that you've never seen anywhere else, which as an adult, we just look at it and go, oh, they just were making compromises because they only had so many pixels and graphical capability. As a kid, you're like, what are they trying to say to me with this weird imagery? And I just got so into it, and very quickly we started amassing games either from the front of, we didn't buy many games, but from the front of games magazines. It would always come with demos. Had loads of Crash tapes and Your Sinclair tapes full of things to do, odd things to do with your computer. And then weirdly one day Dad came back from I want to say the pub, I don't know where he came back from, but he came back from somewhere with this big, it has a negative connotation, but we lived in this village that had these 3 pubs at the centre of it, and so everyone was at the pub, and Dad came home with this big carrier bag full of tapes, and it was the most amazing couple of days of my life, going through someone else's world, looking through these tapes that I hadn't, because when you were that age, you imprinted on each game. You had a backstory for each game and an identity that connected with your life and why you had it and why you wanted it and this and that. Here was someone else's, and I was going into all these worlds that I did not know existed on the Spectrum or at all. And then a few years after that, one of my best friend at the time got himself a NES and then got himself an Amiga within about a year, NES, and then a year later Amiga. And then we got an Amiga to follow him, and from then on, it was just we were digging through worlds. I've said elsewhere that it was like if all of your friends had a Narnia wardrobe in their house, and in those days it wasn't like everyone's got a PS4 or an Xbox and everyone's got FIFA or whatever. No, in those days everyone had something else, and everyone had different games, so you would know which friend's house to go round to visit what worlds, and it was. So that's my gaming history. I am basically, in my heart, amazed by games, and I don't know why we're talking about this. We're not. It's not a games episode.
It's fine. It's fine. It's really interesting. It was really cool that your first one was the ZX Spectrum, and I think that was probably one of my first experiences of video games as well, where my brother bought one, and I think the 2 biggest games that I played on that were Manic Miner. And some other random game I can't think of right now. But
can you think of? Is it the name you're struggling with, or any memory of it at all?
Yeah, it's just gone. Don't worry. This happens to me all the time.
Shout it out at any time during this episode if you remember it. Okay. Come up with it, even if it's a detail or an image. I want to know to see if I can guess what it was.
I got it. I know what it was.
What was it?
Gauntlet.
Of course it was Gauntlet. Everybody had Gauntlet except for me. I didn't have Gauntlet. It took me years to find out it was called Gauntlet, because I thought it was called Gauntlet.
Oh, okay.
G-U-A-N, or G-O-R-N. K-L-U-T. I thought it was called Gauntlet, because of course my friend who had it was like, have you played Gauntlet? No. Gauntlet? Yeah, Gauntlet. And that I just misunderstood him.
Yeah, no, fully get
it. Might not have been until I went to university and the pool room, like the what do you mean? What do you mean? What do I mean? The room that everyone could, the common room, had this machine in it, which was like, I think it was like a MAME cabinet or something. It was just like an arcade cabinet, but it had loads of different games in it. And yeah, one of them was Gauntlet, and I remember looking at it and going, Gauntlet, of course.
You had a MAME cabinet in your commons room. Wow.
Well, it may not have been MAME, and this would have been, I don't even know if they had MAME. This would have been like 2000. Whatever you had in those days. Wow. And it was quite... I can tell, whatever it was an arcade cabinet that had a menu and you could select loads of different games, one of which was Super Mario Brothers. But but it was old, so the colours were all wrong and everything was pink and purple. So whatever it was, it had been there for a time.
Wow.
Wish I knew what it was.
What's your go-to character for Gauntlet though?
Don't ask me. I haven't played it. Whoever it was that had Gauntlet, was it you?
I played it. Yeah, I was always the archer. But Rich, did you ever play Gauntlet, or was that?
I recently played like 5 minutes of Gauntlet Legends on the Dreamcast, but it wasn't really my bag. So I was like, I'm moving on to something else. So yeah.
Cool. But I ought to say, since you've asked me about games, that the reason why I'm here is that a big shining light during this was when Sonic came out, and that was, and I was a Dizzy fan at the time, which was a Spectrum thing. Well, it was all the computers, but I had it on the Spectrum, and so it was, the thing about Dizzy was that it did, you wouldn't know it to look at it now, but it did elevate Spectrum graphics quite a lot over, or at least the ones at Magic Land, the ones I was into, not so much the first one, but quite a way above things like Jet Set Willy, which were the old vanguard of Spectrum games that people were used to, Chucky Egg and things. Dizzy, all the egg-based Spectrum, all the most important Spectrum games got eggs in them. Dizzy was, it was like this successful, I think, attempt to present a sort of almost like a next generation of Spectrum game, something that looked more like a cartoon. And so to go from that and sincerely, thinking like, look at this is great, and then seeing Sonic, which was just miles above anything else that was going on at the time. It was incredible to look at, and just seeing it, I only ever saw it in a shop, or I think round one friend's house one time. Like, I couldn't believe what I was looking at all, and that stayed the case through the Mega Drive era of Sonic. And so during that, they started, and I didn't have a Mega Drive because they were expensive, and we just didn't have one in that house. I got one eventually, but not for years. But what I could do is I could read the comic that started coming out, and I got so into that right from day one, from before day one, because I had a preview issue that came stuck to a Thundercats comic. Thunderbirds comic. That's the opposite of Thundercats. the prey of the Thundercats is the Thunderbirds. And so I was like, oh, this is what I want. I remember saying out loud when Manana gave me the comic, like, oh, this is exactly what I need. And she probably thought that was weirdly grateful of me for this Thunderbirds comic. But no, I meant the next thing that was coming. And I got so into it that I kept every issue, and I've still got them all, and they're all in pretty good nick. So me and my friend Chris McFeely, who does a YouTube series called Transformers: The Basics, just decided to start a podcast because we weren't satisfied that anyone was right about this series. Like, people on the internet would refer to this British Sonic comic as this oddity that was like, oh yeah, and then over there in Britain they did this little thing where Super Sonic was different and it was a bit different. And we were like, no, you don't get it. This thing outsold everything else in the industry for a while. Like, I think it outsold 2000 AD at one stage. It was the hot ticket comic in the UK, and it was a tie-in with the hot ticket game in the UK, and it was a darn sight better than what they were doing in America with Sonic then or since, up until it got revitalized, relatively recently. And so we were like, no, everyone's wrong about this. We need to make something. We need to make a podcast. And this podcast needs to properly chronicle what this comic was like. So that's why I'm here. I've been invited here as a representative of Sonic the Comic, the podcast. And that is why it was relevant to ask me about games, I guess.
I'm going to hold my hands up now.
Yeah.
I'm just going to get this out of the way.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
No, fine.
And that's, I've never read Sonic the Comic.
That's fine. That's normal. Most people haven't. Normal people haven't. But unless, I don't know how old you were, but it's weird if you didn't read it if you were my age in the night. If you were like between about 7 and 13 in the 90s and you never read Sonic the Comic, that's a bit weird.
Yeah, I was there from issue 1. I mean, I used to get it every other week on a Friday night on the big shop with my parents. So, yeah, always picked it up. I've still got my pin badge somewhere. And the big yellow paperclip as well. So,
well, it wasn't a paperclip, it was a belt clip.
Belt clip, that's the one, sorry.
When did it come out? 93, didn't it? So I must have been about 14.
Oh, okay. That's too old then. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think you'd have got on with
So-
maybe the
Yeah, I think I
first
would
couple
have.
of issues because it had like Streets of Rage and Golden Axe and
Yeah.
stuff in it that I think you might have quite liked. But yeah, for the Sonic stuff that leads it. Yeah.
I'm not being funny, like even listening to your podcast,
Yeah.
and I'm a 43-year-old man now,
Yeah.
and I've recently just found them all on archive.org.
Yes.
I'm very tempted to just go back and read them.
I mean, if you, why not? While you've got idly, if you're listening to an episode of my podcast, why not? Why not throw it up and have a little look? But that's not a requisite that anyone we wouldn't dare to imagine anyone would do that. We can't. We're not even. We'd like it if our podcast makes more people read the comic.
Yeah.
But frankly, we'll settle for people just listening to the podcast.
And it's like I think your latest episode, and you're talking about I can't remember the name of the title, but like you're going back to the origins of Sonic.
That's right.
But as a Sonic fan, it was really interesting to hear you talking about that, and makes me want to go back and read the comics, because it's like I've always kind of wondered. I've always had these questions about Sonic and Knuckles and Tails and Mobius and the whole world, and how Sonic came to be, and Robotnik and everything else in this world.
Yeah.
But obviously in the games, they don't really go back and tell you an origin story about this stuff. And then,
No, they don't. No, and there's no need for them to. But the fact is that just something about the market at the time, something about the way games, all games in those days came with a little story in the booklet. So it was assumed you would write a story like, here's how it started. This character was walking along one day when the evil wizard. Da 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 da. But with Sonic, they came up with a belter of an origin story, like a real
yeah.
I liken it to the Spider-Man one, and I liken having a Sonic with no origin. I compare to the first two, Tom Holland Spider-Man film. I haven't seen the third one. I understand maybe they address this in that, but we had so many years where the MCU were going, here's Spider-Man, and wasn't there always that uncomfortable question about well, yeah, but who is he? Why aren't you telling the story of him? I know we've seen it already in a couple of films, and that's the real reason why, because everyone's sick of seeing it in films. But he does need to have an origin story, and it's weird that he doesn't right now. And that's how I feel about Sonic. It's not necessary franchise-wise, but the one they came up with was so good and explained everything in the game so well, right down to the fact that there are little TV computer monitors dotted around the world, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
That it's silly to me that Sega just stopped caring about it, which is always framed, by the way, as they never knew, because they were off in Japan, or Sega of America are more powerful than Sega of Europe, who were doing their own thing, and they had the Dr. Kinterbor, Sonic's best friend, turns into Dr. Robotnik story. But no, that was an American story. That was a Sega of America story that was invented by the people who were involved in developing the game. Because it was something of a co-production. It was mostly made in Japan, but there was feedback and input, and it was on, as late as the end of the 90s. Well, up until I think it was 1999, when the Dreamcast came out and Sonic Adventure came out, and was the first time that they sort of openly ignored all of the backstory. Until then, it was on the official Sega.com website, the American website. That was the story. It was right there. It was on the top, the banner at the top. You could click the origin of Sonic, and you could read about Dr. Kinterbor and our stuff. And it's very annoying to us that all of that stuff is not just forgotten or abandoned by Sega, which is their prerogative, and they can do that in the same way that the MCU did that with Spider-Man for the longest time. But it's treated like it's stupid that any of us cared about it ever. And it's no, that was the story. That's what Sonic the Hedgehog is. And as it happens, yes, it was very heavily represented in this comic, so we lean on that in our show.
And it got me excited to learn that there's these stories being told about this kind of stuff. And
well, if you want the quick version of it, our 8th episode, Episode 8 is where they first... issue 8 is where they first tell the story in Sonic the Comic. And we, on our podcast, we never did this before or since, but we just made an audio drama version of it. And
Okay.
I did it in post. I cut it together myself because what I was doing was, me and Chris now and then will read out lines from the comic and we'll put a voice on now and then where it's relevant. And I just realized that I had this recording of like Chris doing Sonic's voice because he does a fairly decent Jaleel White, and me doing Robotnik's voice. And I was like, well, wait, what if I just add some sound effects? And then before you knew it, in the editing phase, it became this full-on like audio drama that is quite involved. So yeah, if you want to know what the story is, that's a very comfortable, easy way that you can go away and find it out, because we wanted to make sure everyone listening knew it, so we made sure to represent it very clearly. So yeah, episode 8, and you can do that. You can be doing your ironing, and you can find out about that. You don't have to spend any time on it.
Funnily enough, I do actually think I was doing my ironing when I listened to that episode. so not even a lie. But I'd also say that Robotnik impression is just top notch. So
Thank you.
Bravo.
I love the impressions and the voices you do in the podcast. They're just make me smile. In a good way.
There's a lot of fun little lines, and you have to read them out. And if you can do a voice for it, why not do a voice for it?
Exactly.
Yeah, but it helps. It helps the listener to imagine the story, what you're trying to say in the podcast anyway. So
yeah, it's not now. We don't for anyone listening who hasn't heard this. We don't dramatize them all. That's not what the podcast is. We're just talking about it and sort of going into detail about what it was like to be a kid in that place then, so that you've got the context for it. So we put all Cocoa Pops adverts on and things like that. But yeah, no, it was just that one issue. The rest of the time, now and then, if we just need to read out a line, it's normal to. I don't know what it is about me and Chris, but if we're reading a bit and Robotnik says something, we'll be like, and then Robotnik says, "I don't get," we'll just do the voice. But Chris is good at them, and I'm all right at them. So that sometimes I'll in the editing I'll separate them out in stereo and it'll sound a bit like you're in the room with the characters sometimes.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. Well, you've already answered about another 4 questions I had in my mind for you. So, what's like all the issues that you've covered so far?
Yeah.
Has there been like a particular story that has been your more, or like a story you've forgotten and it's just come back to you and it's just been a revelation to you at all?
No, really, because I've remembered it fairly well. Well, I remember them as they come, if you see what I mean. I have this general sense of like, oh, then it's this in a bit and it's that in a bit. I suppose I'd tell you what. Actually, yes, one of the sort of revelations is that when I was a stroppy teenager, when I was a kid, I just thought it was all brilliant. But when I became a stroppy teenager, I started to like decide exactly what I liked, and what I liked was the stories by Nigel Kitching and Richard Elson, who's the writer and artist respectively, who did the sort of what you might think of as the sort of the ongoing epic stories. And then the other main writer, who is a great bloke, is called Lou Stringer, and he's a veteran of UK. He's a cartoonist more than a writer. Well, I don't know if that's fair, but when people who know who he is, they think of him as someone who draws. Unless they're Sonic fans, in which case they think of him as someone who writes. I think that's my impression of him anyway. But his stories were kind of the secondary ones, because he tended to be put on like, well, you do something with some jokes, you do something for the younger kids. And so, as a stroppy teenager, I thought, like, oh, I don't really need those stories, and I'll read these epic Nigel Kitching stories. Well, we found that certainly earlier on in the run, when Lou was writing some of his first few runs of stories, his first couple of years, he was writing the epic stories as well, and they are absolutely brilliant. And he's got this. So he's at the moment we're reading. The reason I say this is that at the moment we're reading the Brutus stories, which are about this guy. Robotnik builds this big robot that he copies his own brain into. So there's this huge metal tank of a man who's called Brutus, and you don't need to know much more to know where it's going. Like, he's trying to overthrow Robotnik secretly. And those stories are so good. And he has this extra skill, which is that because he's a gag strip guy, and he's been doing things like Tom Thug for donkey's years. He is a master of the art of fitting stuff into a small amount of pages, fitting a lot of stuff into a small space, and not seeming like he is. Not the resulting script doesn't feel crammed into the pages. So he can write a 5-page script that feels like, because the scripts in Sonic the Comic, they're 7 pages for Sonic at the start, and then everything else, because they run different characters or adaptations to different games, is 5 pages long, and there's like 4 of these per issue. Well, he can do a 5-page story and it'll feel like a 10-page story, and he can do a 7-page story and it'll feel like a full 20-page issue or something. He can just fit stuff in. He's a master of pacing, and as a result of that, and just his ideas are good as well. And so I'm like, oh, I should have paid way more attention to these stories than I did when I was a kid. And so the revelation there is essentially that like STC is better than I thought it was. But the revelation everybody else has when they read it, if they didn't know about this beforehand, is Mark Millar's adaptation of Streets of Rage. That's the big thing that comes up all the time. Streets of Rage, the big walk-along-y, punchy, like hard kids game almost at the time. Like it was. Do you know what I mean? It was a fighting game. What's the word? A brawler where you're walking along in the streets and punching. And Mark Millar, who wasn't quite Mark Millar yet, I think he was only about 24 or something like that. But he wrote an adaptation of that game that was everything you'd want it to be. Everything that a boy in the 90s could possibly dream of an adaptation of Streets of Rage. It's exactly like watching a kind of like tough cops movie from the 80s. Right up to like people get executed, people get a gun to the head, there's a guy drowns in lava and sort of you can see the fire coming up through his mouth. There's like they nearly swear and then they just stop after the first letter, things like that. It's like there's this whole thing about corrupt cops and like this drug lord's factory getting. It's he doesn't hold back at all. It's like he doesn't know he's writing for a children's comic about Sonic the Hedgehog at all. And you know, I think Mark Millar is someone who goes to excesses that I don't enjoy and don't approve of. But in this case, when he was reined in, presumably by editorial to a certain degree, or knew that there was only so much he could get away with, he uses those boundaries and pushes against them, and it's so fun. Yeah. It's great, and we cover all of that in on our podcast, and it's a lot of fun.
I think that was the other part of when I started listening to your podcast, and you were talking about Streets of Rage strips and the Echo the Dolphin, and all that kind of side to the comic as well. And I thought,
beautiful comic Echo.
Sorry?
Beautiful comic Echo. It's all painterly and wildlife and nature. It's amazing, totally different.
Yeah, and that got me intrigued in it as well, because to hear that they've created new stories in these different worlds as well, just makes me even more intrigued to go back and read these stories.
It's so good. We were so lucky. It was this is why we're so passionate about it, and we genuinely are. We're not like, look at this. Like, we're properly passionate about it, because think of what it was. Sega had taken over the UK games market at the time, so they were like console game. They were the cool gaming at the time, and out comes this comic that's part comic but part magazine, and it's got games reviews in it, and it's got like just news updates, and now and then a pop band will lean in because they've been sponsored by Sega to say that the Game Gear's all right or whatever. But and so there'll be a little feature about that. And so it was like this. It was like a kids' games magazine in a way. It was the format was same as 2000 AD, but if there were also sort of articles between the comics, and these articles were genuinely interesting and you wanted to read them. And of course, looking back, of course, for us to do now, it's even better, because at the time you're like, oh, okay, what's Chris? What's the fellow from The Big Breakfast? Chris Evans. That's got the same name as Captain America. Yeah. Well, here's Chris Evans promoting some Sega event, and he doesn't seem to know much about video games, and he seems to be admitting that here on the page. But at the time, you're just like, oh yeah, it's him off The Big Breakfast. Yeah, fine. Now we get to go, right, you lot. I'm going to tell you about the big breakfast. And we had to do a feature about here's what this was, here's what the context was. And so it becomes like this podcast, I understand, is where it's like, yeah, but here's what there was. Here's what we had. Here's what there was. And you'd never, like, there's no bigger cliche than someone my age or your age waxing lyrical about how better things were. But there's nothing like this now. There's absolutely nothing that I'm aware of. Perhaps there is, but I do not think there's anything like this getting made now. And frankly, it was weird it got made then, because they didn't do it for Turtles, and they didn't do it for Transformers. They came close for these things. There were popular comics for both of those, but they didn't have that like pop culture window feel to them where you're also getting this news and reviews types. Do you know what? Maybe they did. I wasn't a big reader of either of those. I don't think I've ever read the Transformers comic. Chris will probably be jumping up and down if he ever hears this. But that's my understanding, and there really wasn't much like it.
Yeah, I think you've hit a nail on the head there, because when I had kids, and the way they were growing up, I kind of wanted them to read the kind of comics that I had when I was their age, but I've really struggled to find anything. It was all just like CBeebies magazine.
Yeah. Well, when was that? What sort of era was that?
Well, my youngest is 11.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
My oldest is 14.
That. Yeah.
So,
I knew that. That's what I knew you were going to say, because that was exactly the time when there was the worst dearth of comics in the UK. Like the industry just collapsed, and it happened because just people like Smiths and the supermarkets, they hiked up the price of shelf space. Because I thought, when I was a kid, I just thought, if a comic or magazine is popular enough, then the shops want to sell it, and I'm sure there's an element of that, but. No, with comics, you have to pay for the shelf space, whatever happens. And that is why comics went from what we knew, which was, forget about things like Sonic the Comic. There were some things like that, and there would tie in things with various franchises. There was a Ghostbusters comic. That was another one. There was 2018, things like that. But then there were the comedy comics. There were the gag strip comics, the sort that Lou Stringer did that I was talking about. And Beano and Buster and things like that. I was a Buster kid. I loved it. I loved the Beano, all of that. And those just all disappeared, apart from the actual Beano itself. And that's why they all ended up shriveling into those plastic bags full of plastic guns and toys and things. Because that was the only way they could make enough money to sell content printed on paper at all, is if they could convince harrowed parents that for a couple of quid, you can get your kid a bit of tat and it'll be a toy, and they won't shout at you for a toy today. There you go. There's that. And so that, they put a comic in that bag, or they put a magazine that had a couple of pages of comics in, but it was the worst. I'm very happy to say that those days are over, though. It's all starting to come back. If there is a child in the land who is not subscribed to the Phoenix, then that needs to be rectified. The Phoenix is the most wonderful thing in the world. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I've not heard of it, no.
Oh, it's incredible. It does not, but it might as well refer to the name The Phoenix, the revival of the British comics industry, because it's subscription only.
Okay.
But the first, actually, I think you can find it in certain Waitroses and certain Smiths, but generally speaking, it's a subscription model. But you should subscribe to it if you've got kids. It's incredible. And I would say, I think even that 14-year-old, I think there's something for them. First 4 issues are £1 at the moment, I think, something like that, and it's out every week. And it's like a marriage between the old Beano style or Buster style and a Shonen Jump or something like those when we would hear when we were teenagers about how in Japan they have comics that are like ongoing stories. It's that, and it's gag strips, and it's all of the above, and there's not a dud one in it, and it's huge. It's this gargantuan. I don't know how many pages it is, but it's flipping loads, and it's every week. And the stuff, and you can get if you worry that you've missed some stuff. There's also trades books that they've brought out of the old stuff, and I can only tell you that it's flipping brilliant. And don't believe me, put down the £1 and get those 4 issues. It's so good. And then on top of that, I'm to understand that like Monster Fun might be starting to be a regular thing. Monster Fun was one of the gag strip comics that used to be out. I'm holding in my hands right now an issue of it. By the way, I ought to announce my bias here. My wife is in all of these things. She is a comics artist herself.
Okay.
Oh, wicked. That's really cool.
Okay.
And no, it is really cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Really
and it's
cool.
amazing. Some of the people that she gets to work... Tom Patterson is in Monster Fun. That's the guy who used to draw Calamity James.
Wow.
You remember him. He's in this Monster Fun. And I'm holding a one-off special that came out a little while ago, but I think I heard that it's going to be regular. And I think... I'm not privy to any insider information, so I'm fairly sure that that's something I'm allowed to say on the air. And it's... if that happens, if I'm right about that, that's another one. It's starting again. It's coming back.
Yeah.
And get yourselves a subscription. It doesn't matter if you haven't got any kids. Put your £1 down. You're going to love those first 4 issues. I won't make you buy any more, but get those first 4 issues.
I'm there.
I think it's
I'm there. I'm on the website right now looking at it.
I'm doing the same. It looks really, really lovely.
It's so good. That's what the Phoenix is.
The offer expires on the 31st of December 2045, so we're all right.
Okay.
But that's 6 issues. You get 6 issues for £1.
6? I thought it was 4. That's
No.
amazing.
It's 6.
Okay.
Even
Wait
then, 30
until...
quid, cost 30 quid a year. It's not bad.
No. And I've read this. You'll be on the edge of your seat for the next issue every week. It's flipping brilliant.
What the hell?
You're selling it, Dave. You're selling it, mate. It's good.
And I don't work for the Phoenix, so...
No.
I mean, okay, I benefit from it because my wife does. But I said this before. This is the thing. My wife, she... I don't know. I don't want to speak for her, but certainly my ambition was for her to get in the Phoenix and has been for years. And I think that was her ambition as well. It was something that we both really wanted for her. And yes, she got in eventually, and it was like, yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, all good, mate. Yeah, that looks wicked. So if I sound distracted, it's me ordering the Phoenix.
Because you're reading
comics.
the Phoenix.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Okay, I have one more question to ask.
Okay.
Before we get into the mags.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, like, it could be a very generic answer, but, I'm intrigued on what your favourite character is from Sonic the Comic.
Yeah. Let me think. Because the problem is it's probably just Sonic.
Yeah.
Because he's really cool.
That's what I was
But
thinking.
the second most exciting one was when Knuckles came in. That was the moment where it went from because nothing had changed up till that point. When the comic started, it was post Sonic 2, but pre Sonic 3, and we didn't know what was coming, and we didn't. So that was when it was really in the zeitgeist of when Sonic 2 was the biggest. When Sonic was the biggest it ever was Sonic 2. And so it was Sonic and Tails and Robotnik, and they had random adventures and blah, blah, blah. And the comic might not have lasted very long if it wasn't for the fact that they brought out Sonic 3, so they were able to bring Knuckles into the comic. And just... the kids these days, right, they will never understand how, unless they listen to Sonic the Comic, the podcast, how exciting the addition of Knuckles to the series was, because it wasn't just a random new character. It wasn't just, oh, here's someone else. Do we like him? Do we not like him? No. It was like, here's someone else. Like, almost more than when Tails was introduced, because it made sense that Sonic would have a Robin. Do you know what I mean? There's got to be a sidekick, and here's Tails. But then here comes this rival, this villain, this guy who's all spiky and strong, and he can punch Super Sonic so hard that the Chaos Emeralds get punched out of him, and he turns back into Sonic. What? Who's this? And then he comes into Sonic the Comic, and his introductory panel was exactly what it should have been. Sonic's running along, and then his face hits a fist. This fist comes out, and it's a dedicated panel to this fist hitting Sonic's face, and that was the introduction of Knuckles. It was amazing. And not only that, it kicked off I don't know how many issues long run. It might have been as many as 20. I don't know. You'll find out by listening to Sonic the Comic podcast. But it was... no, it won't have been... no, it wasn't 20. But it was a number of issues, 10 or 15 or something, that covered Sonic 3 and then Sonic and Knuckles. So it might have been 20 issues. And might have been more. And the thing about that is that those two games put together actually had something of a plot to them, because they were experimenting in that game with, like, wordless storytelling and environmental storytelling and things like that. And so they were telling a story. And so give that to this scriptwriter who's already starting to tell bigger stories and a bit more sort of multi-part, more epic feeling ones. And that just becomes this incredible story that's by far the one that people remember as like the highlight of the whole series. Which is all about this Death Egg, which is a Death Star gag that Robotnik launches. Except the comic, in the game, like in Sonic 2, there was a Death Egg zone, and like I guess because you were expected to just get the joke, they never showed you it unless you did the cheat and you found the sound test. In which case, you got a little tiny picture of this ball with these, instead of the one circle on it like the Death Star, it had two and a mustache. It was really good. It was funny. But in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, they took it seriously, weirdly enough. They kind of made it really epic and this huge thing. So put it into a comic, and now they're making incredibly epic, and they took it really seriously, for the tone of the comic. And so that was great. So yeah, probably the introduction of Knuckles. But there was one character who was introduced who I was so excited about, maybe more even than Knuckles, that I remember just pacing round and round outside the house, unable to contain myself all morning on the morning when I was going to be able to go and get that issue, when that character was finally revealed and actually in it rather than just being teased. And I am not going to tell you who that is, because it hasn't actually appeared yet in the strip. I don't know how soon it'll be. I guess it'll be... it actually might be this summer.
Ooh.
Okay.
And if not, then it's next summer. So yeah, wait and see with that. But the hits didn't stop coming. Sonic the Comic was brilliant, and that's why we make this podcast, to get the word out that there's more to it than just Super Sonic was evil and that's weird, and Robotnik used to be thin and that's weird. No, it was a good comic.
Yeah, no, and it's working. Even from what I've listened to, it's already made my opinion of it changed. So,
right.
So you're doing well, mate. You're doing well. Okay. Well, let's get into our magazine or comic choices. And what we've done, we've all just chosen a magazine or a comic from the 90s that was one of our favourites, or we've got some fond memories of reading about. And why don't we come...
I know what I'm going to say.
Yeah. Well, let's come to you first then, Dave, as the guest.
Okay.
And find out what magazine or comic that you chose.
There is one... When people ever ask me, like, what has inspired you, because I make comics as well, and whenever anyone asks, like, oh, what are your influences or whatever, like, I've got two answers: a TV series and a comic, and nobody has heard of either of them. And my comic, and tell me if you've heard of this, because it'd be lovely to know someone who did. It was called The World of Whim. Do you know what this is?
Vaguely.
WYM. Whim. Okay, so this was a comic. It was published by Clearmark in 1990. I don't know if it stretched as far as... No, it didn't stretch as far as 1991. There was only 6 issues of it. There was only supposed to be 6 issues of it. Or rather, it was a closed story. And it's an amazing thing. You know, I was just talking about how unlikely it was to get a Sonic the Comic and how there wasn't anything else like it. I've never heard of anything else that follows the model that Whim was. It's like a creator's dream come true, and it's like a child who wants to read comics' dream come true. And here's what it was. So the story of The World of Whim was that there was this girl who was being babysat by her older brother, who is a punk, and he's got he's got a purple mohawk and a pierced ear and a leather jacket, and he's got a badge of an angry face and things like that. And So he's meant to be babysitting his sister, but he's rubbish at it. He doesn't babysit her. He's just, I don't know what he's doing. He's off drinking or something like that. So she's more or less left on her own. But she is very well behaved, and so it's fine. She's sitting in her room doing her homework. At which point, an elf explodes out of the toilet and just fills her house up with crazy magicness. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that he's there is incredibly disruptive, and it's like one of those things where, the kid has to hide from the family that there's ETs living in their bedroom or whatever. You know what I mean? It's that sort of thing. So there's things flying around. There's Pac-Man ghosts coming out of the Atari and flying through the air. There's records playing themselves. There's lightning magic everywhere. And the brother comes to investigate, gets hit by some of the magic, and he turns into a little teddy bear. But like an alive teddy bear, but a teddy bear. And so she's like, you've got to put him back. And the elf goes, oh, all right, but I've run out of magic dust because I was having so much fun. Because he is like the elf equivalent of the brother. He's like a punk elf. And he's got a leather jacket or something. And he's like, he's a tearaway. So he has to, so they're like, oh, all right, we'll have to go back to the world of Whim then to get more magic from the center of the volcano at the heart of the world. And they all go down the toilet, and then they go on adventures. And there's 6 issues of these. That's the first issue, and then there's 5 more adventures of issues of just adventures in this world. But the thing about it that makes it impossible, just a dream come true, is that it was literally just cover to cover this story in kind of the American mold, where you can expect to pick a comic up and just read our comic. That wasn't something that I was aware of existing here, and certainly not for kids. Like, the stuff that I was reading at the same time, or had just maybe I'd just aged out of, would have been things like Acorn Green and stuff, which you'll be too old for that. It was a semi-educational, or just educational probably, sort of magazine with comics in it, but that were done in the Buttons style, where it's for very, very little kids, but which managed to commission these tie-in figures that I'm looking at one now on my shelf, and it looks every bit as good as the Muppet Babies figure I've got next to it, and the E.T. figure that I've got next to it, like proper little figures. And they were just these little woodland creatures who had jobs and things. There was a postman mole or badger or something, and there was things like that, and a nurse rabbit, things like that. And that's the sort of thing that we were reading as kids. It was mostly mazes and information about what leaves come out in spring and things like this. And then here's the World of Whim, which is just this story. It's a fantasy comic about magic stuff happening, but also it's a comedy. I should say the credits here, that was Andy Lanning, who's a very well-known inker and artist and so on. He was drawing it. And he was one of the creators. John Carnell wrote it and was co-creator, and then Anthony Williams, also co-creator and also artist. Although my understanding is that it was mostly drawn by Andy Lanning, but I don't know. Maybe one of those is the inker. I don't know. And there's only one deviation from this cover-to-cover story about this fantasy story, which is that in the middle there was a section of 4 or 5 pages of prose, but those were also stories set in this world, and they knew that everyone was going to skip over them, so they weren't vital to the story. They weren't like, here's the next thing that happens, but they were just like the appendices. They were like scene setting stuff. So in the first issue, the prose story was about what happened to this elf before he exploded out of the toilet, and how he got there, and what his life was, and why he'd been expelled from the magic university, which is why he couldn't just go home and get some magic, and what was up with that. And so there was always this prose story in the middle, and that was what it was. World of Whim. I can't tell you much more because I haven't reread it since I was little. I've got it all. The reason I haven't reread it since I was little is because I didn't have the first issue, because it ended up somewhere else in the house and I didn't know where, and I still don't know where. But fortunately for me, I was able to find a really good nick issue 1. It's hen's teeth, this comic. You're not going to be able... The only thing I've found online about this comic is a blog talking about how difficult it was for them to get hold of it. Although they do say that issue 1 seems fairly easy to get hold of for some reason. I don't know why that was the one where everyone... I was going to say it was the one everyone wants to sell. No, it's the one everyone kept. They didn't even bother buying the rest. That's why. And that's probably why it ended after 6 issues. But the World of Whim, on issue 6, introduced me to the concept of the series finale. This was the first thing I ever experienced where the last episode was the biggest episode. And it was incredible. The scale of it, because they get to the volcano and they get more magic, and there's it's exploding out of this elf everywhere. I can't remember how. I'm gonna have to read it because I know where it is now. I'll keep it with me old comics, and I'm gonna have to get it out and read it.
Yeah, I'm really gutted. I didn't read this. I'm very gutted. It sounds amazing.
Same.
It's really good.
I can't imagine it's got a series finale as great or as weird as the Biker Grove one.
No, it doesn't. Admittedly, no.
Okay, really interesting. Is it not available on Archive.org or nowhere being scanned?
I personally haven't found it scanned anywhere, and that I realise as the words leave my mouth that means it's up to me as the sole holder of all 6 issues. But the thing is, in those days, they printed these comics a bit bigger than a scanner. That's the thing. It's bigger than A4 by a little bit, so it's very difficult to scan. Certainly, the covers are all right, but once you start opening them up, you're gonna ruin the thing by scanning it.
Yeah.
I'd like to though, if there was a way.
Yeah, because I think some people who do like scan all the game magazine online, they literally rip the magazines apart. So
my god!
So they can get where it all binds together. So you can't open the magazine enough to get the whole page.
To get because it would bend at the side.
Yeah, so I think they have to unbind it. I'm saying they rip it apart. I think they're actually a bit careful with that, and they unbind it carefully so that all the pages are still intact, so they can get a full proper page scan of it. So I can imagine you probably don't want to do that to those really.
I mean, if I find my copy of issue 1 that I remember being a bit battered and in much worse nick than the one that I got off eBay, then I'll do it with that. But no, if anyone in the Manchester area has a massive scanner and doesn't mind me coming round and using it, let me know.
There you go. Okay, great choice, mate. Very interesting. Rich?
So for me, I mean, it'd be cheating. I'm not going to pick multiple ones, but I feel like at the time I was heavily into a lot of the Jerry Anderson comics. Obviously, they blew up in the 90s, so I was dabbling with a lot in terms of Joe 90, obviously of course Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, Stingray. If I picked one, because I know I need to pick one, no, I probably would say Thunderbirds, because that was the big one.
That was the main one, and it would have had the biggest budget behind it because it was the main one, and it would have had all the good stuff, all the bells and whistles.
I think what I love they shared in common though, and what I loved, there was all the things they had. Obviously, you had the 3 gifts, but I liked that they had a lot of things like the blueprints and the schematics of all the craft. And I always found that fascinating as a kid. I loved it. I mean, I've still got my my Haynes Thunderbirds manual hardback now, and that kind of grew out of the comics. I think it was the first time I saw anything like that in a publication. I mean, I was used to just your regular comic strips, letters pages, that kind of stuff, and I don't know, it felt a bit grown up. Felt like, oh, okay, this is way more involved, a bit techie, and it's kind of felt like good mature reading. Like it was actually kind of good for my brain. I was getting, I never got into engineering or construction, but I felt like, okay, I'm getting some knowledge here. This is going to take me places. I really love those comics at the time. I mean, I like with Sonic the comic. I loved the strips and the stories they told that were obviously separate, not connected to the TV show. It just kind of expanded on the world beyond, the Super Mario Nation that I saw every Friday night on BBC Two. I was obsessed with those.
I remember loving
comics.
when that came back on, and I can't remember when, but it was mid early 90s, wasn't it? It was.
Yes, it was
when that became big again. And so I was well aware of Super Mario. So when it would always come up saying Super Mario Nation, I'm like, oh, look at that.
I know.
But do you think there's been anything else that's just had such the biggest revival that the Thunderbirds did at that time? I mean, I can't think of anything really that's come back and really.
But it was odd, wasn't it? Because it was by far not the only thing that, even in that time slot, that got, because I think it was on sort of in like weekday evenings at one point, wasn't it? Thunderbird. We used to watch it while we were eating our tea, and
Yeah.
Stingray, and that was the slot that they would put things like the Addams Family on and stuff like that. Like, they were always putting these old things on, and the Thunderbirds one wasn't even done. It didn't feel like a revival. It just felt like, this is one of the things that's always on. And then Blue Peter.
Yeah.
And suddenly
Tracy
I don't know what it was. I don't know. But it can't have been Blue Peter's fault, because weren't they only making that because Tracy Island was a big hit toy? And they were like, well, sod that, we'll make our own.
Yeah, because it was like the most popular toy of the year. Nobody could get hold of it.
Right. So they made one. Right, yeah, because everyone attributes the success of the Thunderbirds revival to Blue Peter, and that can't be true. Maybe they don't even do that, and I've simply misunderstood.
If I did, it's the first I've heard of it.
Oh, well, then I've obviously just misunderstood then. So I wonder what it was. Like, because it wasn't like, and now, kid, like, it was just on. It was just normally, like, I don't think there was ever a time in my life when it wasn't on. It was like Land of the Giants or whatever. It was always just on.
Yeah, I used to love Land of the Giants. Sunday morning, Channel 4.
Sunday morning, Channel 4. I thought it was all right. And then between series of that, you would get Lost in Space, and that was all right. And you just watch it. It was these old things that were on, and you just watched them. And then for some reason, we all started I'll tell you what, if maybe it's similar to why I used to watch it, and maybe this is why it took off, is because it was really, really something that you could watch with your parents, because they were already into it from their childhood.
Yeah.
And it was being repeated. So, like, what would it be? It would I suppose it'd be like if they put on for my generation, like the first series of Power Rangers or something. Or like, something more like if Henry's Cat came on or something like that. And we'd all, yes, watch Henry's Cat. Let's put this kids in front of this. Because that would feel like something they'd probably still be basically into. And then you would watch it yourself. And that's probably why it took off, because all the families were watching it together.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, because I think that's one of the things actually that that was the appeal at the time of those shows, that there was that connection. Because I remember when I was reading like the Thunderbird comics, my dad would make comments, and I remember even before that when I used to get like Beano and the Dandy, and I actually would give it to my dad, and he'd read it in bed.
Oh,
which I thought was
brilliant.
quite sweet. I mean, obviously, it kind of obviously had evolved a little bit from his childhood, but. Yeah, all the things were still there. He still had the Bash Street Kids and Roger the Dodger. He was in his element. So it was kind of that little bit of a connection. He had something in common with his son that wasn't, crass American Saturday morning TV that he could not stand. Bit of British. He loved it. So, yeah, I think that's what was appealing about it. It felt almost like a comic out of time. It felt like I could be reading something from like the late 60s. It had that kind of real... boys' adventure kind of thing going on. I loved it because that's what I loved about those shows at the time. It had a different spirit, I think, to what we were watching. At the time.
I didn't really like those. I sat through them, and we would sing the Aquamarina song at school and things like that. Still,
Really?
if anything fits the cadence of the word Stingray, I'll sing it to the Stingray song still. But like. It was just about some guys, and they were shooting and explosions and stuff. It was too James Bond for my liking.
Yeah.
But compared to some of, you were always grateful for anything watchable that was on at tea time. You know what I mean? Because you could be watching the news, and nobody wanted that.
No. Indeed not. Indeed not.
Not at all. Okay. Chris, are you with us? Do you want to put forward your magazine choice?
Magazine choice. I wasn't, like I said to you guys earlier, I wasn't really a big comic reader in the 90s, but I did invest in a small thing called the Star Trek Fact Files when I was a kid.
Yes. Yes.
Nice.
So that was my main interest back then, before the internet and before these message boards and HD screen caps and everything that you get now.
The Star Trek Fact File was a Star Trek fan wiki, but that you had to purchase in bits and fill your house up with.
Yeah, and then rifle through it to the correct location and wherever you're looking for equipment or stuff. And that was my epitome of nerdishness. That was, and as I got older,
but I don't think it was like that nerdy to be into that, because it's weird looking back that like people, sort of in the internet age and in our adult lives, the synonymous with nerd is likes Star Trek. But when we were kids, everyone watched Star Trek. There couldn't be anything more mainstream, except Neighbours. That was the only more mainstream thing than Star Trek. And yes, okay, getting the fact files, okay, that tips you over into nerd. But I knew a lot of people who got it. Now maybe those people were nerds, but they you know what I mean? They didn't get called nerds or anything. It was just a good thing on telly, and so we got the tie-in thing.
Yeah, and yes, it was all fictional, but it was still exciting and it was still good to read, and the pictures looked nice, and the CG artists at the time put great effort into the renders and different views of the sets, especially got me as well, because you see the miniatures and stuff, but these artists would take these small sets that you never saw the other side of and elaborate on it.
Oh, cool.
And you're like, so that bit was behind there, and that... it's
cool.
And it allowed you to see the shooting set in a completely different way and perspective. And then, these guys have vouched for me. I've got this thing about people trying to fit shit into stuff, and it's just like... Again, to quote William Shatner, it's just a TV show.
Oh, I see what you mean. Right.
Yeah.
You don't mean like...
No, not in a literal sense. No.
Fit things into things.
No.
A weird bugbear to have.
Yeah.
Oh, look at him over there. Look at him trying to fit that into something. Oh.
Yeah. What's his problem? He seems a bit down. He can't fit engineering into the small bay where it's supposed to be. For fuck's sake. But it was still fascinating, and I used to read them all the time. And again, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have DVDs. We didn't have Blu-rays. We couldn't pause anything unless you recorded it, but it was just a great collection, and I still have them in the loft for some reason.
Nice. Oh, I bet my parents do as well.
The funny thing about many of them.
Funny thing about the Star Trek fact file is that, if anyone didn't get it, you might not anticipate the way it worked, which is that essentially what they'd done was ahead of time they'd written and produced a gigantic encyclopedia of multiple books worth of this thing, and then they released it seemingly random pages, and they were stuck together, they were glued together, but they really easily peeled. You just peeled them apart, and then you put them in the fact file. So as you collected it, you didn't go here's page 1, here's page 2. No, you were here's page 153, here's page 4, and you had to flip through it to find where this new page you've got goes.
Yep. Do you know what? I was so young when did the fact files first start? Must have been 94, 95.
Yeah, I would have said around then.
And I remember sitting there, and at the time, I was struggling with maths and stuff, and I was my mum had to help me put it into the right file because you had to put the right numbers so you could. Yeah. It's basically a Rolodex, isn't it? It's just you got to find a certain thing if you see it on TV and pause it, and then you. It's so archaic now you think about it, and you're just you got to pause what you're watching, or quickly let me just get my massive folder out, boom, blow the dust off of it. I'm
gonna look that up. Yeah. Even though
is it alien tech or not?
Even though you were never when you watch Star Trek, you're not supposed to know the stuff. They tell you about it in the episode.
Yeah, that's the thing. And when you scroll through it, I remember looking at one of the first things they released, and I'm like. It was some bio about a planet from the original series on Next Gen. And you think to yourself, you see and hear this planet for 10 seconds on screen. Yeah. And you're like, I'm not going to read 3 goddamn pages on this planet that doesn't even exist.
No.
And I don't think I've ever read them.
No, that's the thing.
Right? I read about the ships and then what happens on them. But then after that, I'm just like, I don't care about
what I did.
I don't care about Romulans and.
No, I think I read the first couple, the first one. I would sit and read through that because it's one, But by the time you had 10 of them, you're not even consulting it anymore, because for one thing, you can't be watching the TV and go I'll find out about how phasers are made or whatever, because you can't guarantee they've released that one.
No, exactly.
So there's no point in getting your folders out, and then. It just builds up and it builds up, and eventually... And the thing is, I don't know quite what happened. I don't know if it was a misunderstanding between us, but long after I didn't want it anymore, my mum asked if she was allowed to unsubscribe from it. Yeah. And I didn't realise we were still getting it. And I'm like, yeah, yes, I haven't looked at this since issue 4. How many have you got? And she had piles of folders of them.
Oh my god!
I think they called it a day, like mid-run of Enterprise.
God, that was
Because-
ages later.
Did it go
Or
that
maybe
That's
just on the
insane.
cusp of Nemesis.
Yeah.
That's how long they were going for, because I've got an issue and it's got, I'm sure I remember it had the final issue written on it. And it had like a spec on like NX-01 and then some ships from Nemesis. And then
Well-
that's the last I ever saw of it.
I'm going to call them on that because they should have written the final frontier on it. Come on.
Yeah, that's missing a trick, that is.
Big time.
Nah, they probably did, didn't they?
Yeah. But now we have the internet.
Now we have the internet. I wonder if... No, they'll have thrown them away. I wonder if they've got them, because they'd still be in the cellophane, most of them. They would never have opened them. Oh, no,
It's
they'll have
going to
chucked
be
them
there somewhere,
away.
surely.
It might be. Oh,
The tr-
if
the
they were
trouble is
sensible, they've chucked it away, but I don't think they will have.
The trouble is they're not worth a lot either, because I looked it up on eBay about a year ago, and people are selling like the whole collection for like 20 quid. But no one wants it.
Because no one wants it. Yeah.
No one
needs
wants a
it.
metric ton of paper
That's the
for
thing.
something
it
that
was.
you can just punch in on Google and get exactly the result you need.
Yeah. I mean, there'll be... collectors are going to want it just for the fact that it existed.
Those weird
But-
completist people, yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's... Yeah, if it ain't worth anything, who cares? They can have it for 20 quid. They can come round and get it. I'm not posting it.
Yeah.
Well, I think like you touched on like earlier where you said like you got the new episode, new issue, sorry, and they were all out of sort with different
Yeah.
page numbers everywhere else, and it kind of made me think about sticker albums it's the same kind of sense,
Yeah.
really.
It's the
isn't
same concept, yeah. You still
That's
got to
right.
find where it goes.
it?
That's right.
but I think it was that-
Except with sticker albums, they're randomly distributed, whereas in this, there was no gambling element to it. Like you got there were no duplicates. Everything, there were no swaps.
Yeah. And can you imagine swapping Star Trek Fact Files pages in the playground?
Exactly, yeah. With the two other people who ever may have got it.
Like, it's a whole cliche of Family Guy and Simpsons jokes right there, but it's just no, like you can't even give them away. I don't think anyone would even want them.
No.
But like you said earlier, like the amount of issues I got, and I'm like, I don't even know what this race of people are.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have Sky,
Yeah.
so the only time I ever saw like Late Voyager and Early Enterprise was on Channel 4 or BBC.
Yeah.
On a Sunday or on a Friday night.
Yeah, eventually.
And I'm like, okay. And then I'll just forget about it and just put it, like you said, leave it in cellophane, and then just like...
the thing
you
about...
lose interest. I became a teenager in between that gap. So.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, to be honest, I was a teenager. That was what
Yeah.
that was why I was into it. But the thing about the Star Trek Fact Files was that, like, you had to just be inherently excited about the concept of every detail of a TV series having information about it,
having
at your fingertips.
functionality and
Yeah. I remember there was this amazing day I spent on the internet once in what must have been about 1998 when I found out that there was this bloke, this one guy who had made this incredible compendium of information about Power Rangers. Now, that's so far so normal on the internet, right? Like that's the sort of thing people do. That's a nerdy thing you do. But no, this guy had gone through every episode of Power Rangers, and then and there was already a few years worth of it by 1998, and he had basically made a massive cross-referenced index of every line of dialogue spoken in Power Rangers, everything ever in it, every little weapon, every little suit, everything. But even the tiny details. So like if it's Billy the Blue Ranger, he's got a little brother and he does this. There would be an entry for that, and that would branch off into like, here's the details of the thing Billy's little brother does in one episode. And then it would cross-reference with hypertext links anytime that anything was connected to anything else, and there would be references for every episode. And like now, you kind of expect something almost on that level from something like, for example, a Star Trek wiki. But those, you understand, or at least you hope, are put together by a community. This was one bloke had done this with Power Rangers, and it was just looking at it now, looking back, I'm like, oh no, like what? Oh no, it's almost scary behavior. But at the time, it was really inspiring, like that this information had been collated, and that it could be followed and indexed and printed out, and I don't know.
Yeah, but that's showing a passion, but without being overbearing.
Uh-huh.
That's showing a passion to archive this thing because you love it so much.
Yeah.
That I don't find that weird. A lot of people say, "Oh, yeah, really?" It doesn't sound weird to me because I've been in that position, and I know people who, again, to bring up the autistic spectrum. That sounds extremely like something that my friend Reese would do.
Right, and Reese would have loads of fun doing it, I bet.
He's got his thing for Lord of the Rings. And he just,
there you go. Perfect example.
He wasn't even born when the Fellowship was released. But being, Asperger's, he's obsessed with it. He could tell you at the drop of a bloody wizard hat where each thing happened. And not only that, he can also explain the differences between the books and the films and the extended editions.
Yeah, of course.
And that is someone with such a passion, this guy to do that to Power Rangers. I never would have thought to do that.
Well, and the thing is...
But again, because it didn't exist for him, he's had to do it himself, and he's getting joy from others getting this information, regardless if some people find it weird or not.
Well, no, because with Tolkien, that's a perfect and very rewarding thing to be focused on if you are that way inclined, because the information is, in fact, out there, and Tolkien had already come up with it. I understand some of it has been filled in later by his son or whoever it is, but most of it he already knew before he wrote Lord of the Rings. So you can pick through all of his notes and his other releases and his writing and go like, oh, okay, that little glade that you spent 2 seconds in walking from that place to that place has this rich history behind it. Here are all the historical characters who ever set foot in it, and that's all there for you. It must be so rewarding and engaging if you are that way inclined. That's the great thing with
the Lord of the Rings films and, dare I say, The Hobbit, is that they had access to all the appendices and all the additional notes that he wrote to back up certain events and stuff like that. And
you get the sense that Peter Jackson was like almost that level into it already as well.
Yeah, like so passionate about this dream project that he's wanting to do, and then he gets the opportunity, but to have access to all of that is just like it's a never-ending pot of stuff. They didn't even use all of it either. They spun it off into different scenes or gave different characters the same dialogue to improve pacing. But I couldn't imagine being part of that continuity team writing that screenplay.
Well, it's going on now, isn't it? They're working on a TV series, and that team, they're overjoyed all the information they can draw from.
All the unpublished notes.
Yeah.
It's mad.
That's really interesting. But let's just bring it back around a little bit, and but back to the fact files. And obviously, the fact files were they were a Partwork, weren't they? They were, a weekly issue that was only part of what you was collecting, and I mean they're still quite popular today. But I mean, for us in the 90s, they were just really cool, weren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was like after Christmas, wasn't it? Like New Year, they'd all come out.
Was it? Oh.
I think it was. Maybe I'm thinking of something else. Maybe it's just holidays and exercise videos. I thought it was Partworks, maybe not.
But they knew how to market these things to perfection in annoying ways, because obviously the first issue would be like 99p.
Yeah.
With
a free binder.
Yeah, with the free binder or the free first part or whatever it is you're collecting, or you got 2 books instead of 1, or some such nonsense like that, just to rope you in for the second issue to be like £10.
Yeah.
But
it's like the modern day Partworks now, isn't it? Where you collect figurines or ships or something like that. It's like you need to be a millionaire just to get like the first year's worth of the damn things.
Yeah, I think when I was doing a bit of research, and like they were given an example, like you would have to buy 120 odd issues or something like that to get a whole collection of whatever it is they were selling you. And if they were like £6-8 an issue,
Yeah.
that's quite a lot of money.
Yeah, it's nearly £1,000, isn't it?
Yeah. Just for some little plastic, whatever it is you were collecting at the time.
Yeah.
As an adult, obviously, we see through them. We know what they're up to. But as a kid, it was just so exciting just to get these weekly things that we could build up as a collection.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if there was any in particular that you remember from the 90s that you were particularly fond of collecting. Rich, have you got any at all?
A big one for me that sticks out was the X Factor, which at the time I was already deeply into X-Files and all things, alien abduction, UFOs. And it was just a Partworks that went into things like, funnily enough, pandemics, Area 51, aliens, the whole shebang, ghosts. It was everything. So
that sounds wicked.
yeah, it was quite mature, but it had that pre-teen intrigue. I just hoovered it up. I was obsessed. Got all the ring binders. I don't recall there being anything in the way of gifts. I think it was purely just, there was nothing to build over time. There wasn't like a alien spaceship or anything like that. It was all just factual based. Just, this is information. It's an information dump. It's just
Did you get
knowledge.
Did they give you like a divider or something every now and again?
Yeah, it did indeed. Yep, it was. Yep. Other than the lack of anything to build, it was very much your traditional part work. But I just found it to be the most fascinating one. Other than that, there was one that stuck out to me was Quest as well, which was just purely educational, like almost like an encyclopedia, but it covered a lot of different topics such as science, technology, construction, cities, transport, and drugs as well. It just did a bit of everything. And I think it was the kind of thing that you kind of could really get past your parents, because they'd be like, okay, this is educational. Yeah, this is good. And I think with that, you actually got collectible playing cards as well, like a Trivia Pursuit kind of game. But all based on, those topics I've just mentioned, such as drugs.
So you've got drugs top trumps somewhere in your house.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, my ketamine has,
more addictive score than your heroin.
Exactly. They're the main ones. I mean, other than that, big one for me also was How Does Your Body Work as well, which had an amazing...
was it a skeleton?
Yeah, you built a skeleton, but over the top of that, you built the muscle as well.
Oh, really?
Sweet. Yes, that's familiar, actually. Yeah.
When you held it up to the light as well, if you put it up to like a light bulb, you kind of... I don't know what they call it again, but like where the light passed through the plastic, it just kind of was red. Almost where you put your hand over a light bulb and it just... You see all the blood vessels and you can see everything just kind of glow through your skin. It had that kind of effect to the plastic, so it was really, really cool. Yeah, you had all the organs, everything.
Wow.
That was fantastic. Yeah, that was that was probably my big three was X Factor, Quest, and that. So,
like looking forward to the issue where you get a rude body part like a bladder or a colon.
Yeah. I was just going to say that. Yeah, like next week free kidneys.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. What about yourself, Dave? Have you got any Partworks that you were fond of?
Yeah, dog. I mean, apart from obvious nod, doff of the hat has to go to the old ones where you would put together a skeleton something.
Mm-hmm.
So like there was the Tyrannosaurus Rex one or whatever. But I was okay. So I'll start with a couple of highbrow ones that my mum got to be educational at me. Which was I bet it was called the Classics Collection or something, but Mum would have this one where it would come with a book, and it would and it would be like, I mean, so for example, I know that we had the Oliver Twist one because I actually read it. Well, I didn't read it. Mum read it to me, but it came with a magazine about Oliver Twist, so she'd be reading that a chapter a night to me or whatever, and in between I could be reading about it in the book. I don't know how many of those came out. It was a little hardback and everything, so I don't know. Presumably they weren't just on the newsagent shelves like that. You probably had to subscribe to it to get it at all. I don't know. And then similar to that, the musicals collection, which would come with a CD on the front.
Ooh, okay.
And what they would do is they would get like whatever the cheapest version of any given musical was that they could get their hands on, and they would even cut that down, so you'd get sort of 6 to 10 tracks on the CD. And I remember there was a Godspell with Darren Day, which was turned out to be a cut down version of a studio recording that they'd done that year. There was a My Fair Lady with Bob Hoskins singing "I'm getting married in the morning." I'm very glad that exists in the world. And there was, but I think they were all existing recordings, because there was when you were listening to them, you were like, oh, they've just thrown this together for this. But there was a Wizard of Oz, for example, which turns out to be a cut down version of, I think a Broadway revival, because I just found it on YouTube when I was poking around, and I think it has Eartha Kitt as the witch. Which, and I wouldn't have known who she was at the time, so I didn't know that, so I wouldn't have noticed. But so that was interesting. And similar to that, by the way, one that we loved. What was it even called? Maybe one of you can remember this and can tell me what it was called. But what it was basically a way of packaging classical music to kids. So again, very, very worthy middle class, highbrow. That's a parent trying to educate their kids, right?
The kids. Can't think what that was. Can't think what that was.
Okay, well, here's how it worked. So they would take the Planet Suite, right? Holst. Is that Holst?
No.
That's Holst.
Yes.
And they would give it, and it would come on a CD. And tracks 2 through how many tracks there are in the Planet Suite would be the Planet Suite. Track 1 would be the adventures of these 2 kids who end up traveling through space. And it was this dramatized thing where the 2 kids, it was always the same 2 kids, you knew them from every issue, they were like, oh wow, oh no, I've sat on the button and the rocket's taking off, now we're going through space, you know what I mean? And they would have this adventure, and the magazine that came with it had that as a story, and it was all illustrated with these brilliant paintings that were all kind of, I remember them being kind of sort of snazzy and resembling, do you remember there was a sort of a style at the time that was almost looked like textured cut out bits and bobs? There was a Smarties advert that looked like it at one point.
Yes.
And it kind of had that vibe sometimes. And there was, so they did Rhapsody in Blue, and this was a gangster story that they got caught up in, just stuff like that. It was pretty cool, and you would get, it was Partworks in that you got a box to put these in, and you built up your CD collection, or tape. You could tick the box. Presumably it was more expensive if you got CD. But my favourite, do you guys remember the Ancestral Trail?
No.
Okay. So the Ancestral Trail. Oh my god. Oh my god. It sounds more boring than it is, because what it sounds like is a genealogy thing, doesn't it? Where you're going to trace your DNA back to your family's roots or whatever. No. No. What the Ancestral Trail was, issue 1 came in this kind of like a binder. It was like this big rectangle, made to look like this envelope of secrets, and it looked, with I can't remember, but probably with a drawing of a wax seal on it and stuff like this. And here in this thing lie the secrets. And you unfold it out into a map, either that or a map just came in it, and it had and it was a magazine, and thereafter it was just a magazine. But this first one came with all sorts of bits and bobs, and it was just the story of this kid setting off on a fantasy adventure. And it was I looked up a thing about it, and here's a website called theancestraltrail.com. Here's how it describes it. The series begins and ends with our hero, a youngster named Richard. His first trip is to the ancestral world. There he learns from an old man named Golan that he is the chosen one, appointed to save this world from a great evil being known simply as the Evil One. Said Evil One has already conquered the ancestral world by stealing 6 pods from the Tree of Life and imprisoning 6 guardians. So basically, it was just this seemingly endless, we're just going to keep doing this as long as you keep buying it, ongoing fantasy story. But it had so much to do in it. I remember my favourite bit was, so the magazine was always another, episode in the story. And it had these lavish painted pictures, and it was all, there was nowhere in it that wasn't a picture of some kind. The text was printed over in the blank spaces in the pictures, but it was all lavishly painted. And they had these two little guys who were called Shumi and Shubi, I believe, and they were like little rock frog things. They were just they just looked like boulders but with eyes, and they would hide them. So you had to look through the paintings every issue to find Shumi and Shubi. They'd be in there somewhere, just disguised as a couple of rocks or whatever. That was cool. The evil one was this really cool, sort of like this horrible demon mask-looking thing, and it was really, really horrible and cool. And it came with, and I am holding in my hands right now, a collection of Ancestral Trail battle cards.
Wow.
A game called Monster Might, which says copyright 1993. So this was slightly later than I would have guessed, actually. This was contemporary with Sonic the Comic, in fact. And I thought that you popped them out of something, but I'm looking at these cards now, and there's no sign of them having been popped out from anything. So I guess they just came either attached... with the first issue, they would have been just bunged in the folder. Maybe if there were any more after that, they would have ended up... they would be in little things. But they are, they're just battle cards. So I'm looking at one here that says Claw, K-L-A-W, Earth, and it's got a painting of a really cool Grim Reaper on it. And he has got Evil 4, so it's top trumps, Size 2, Strength 3, Magic 1, Trickery 5, Weapons 2, and of a total of 17. And that is all under the header of Megatron power. So whoever was writing this thought, I'll just come up with a random cool-sounding word. And what they came up with was Megatron. All right, in 1993. You've been beaten to it, mate.
Just a bit.
And here's a card of Shumi and Shubi, the two little guys. They're Earth type. But this... It just went on, and, you just got the next issue, and here's the one where he's up against a giant spider, and here's the one where he's up against some other thing. And then... they started to, as do all these Partworks, they started to become harder to find as the newsagents stopped stocking them because nobody was buying them. But I was into it. I wanted to know what happened next. I liked the idea of collecting the whole story, which I didn't do. I probably ended up with like 10 issues max altogether. And then one day, we went back to the newsagent and I found a copy of the Ancestral Trail, excuse me, and it was wrong. It had changed. From everything had changed. The logo had changed from this sort of old script-looking font. Imagine Nightmare. Everything in it kind of looked a bit like Nightmare. In fact, the Evil One helmet was a bit reminiscent of that sort of thing, of Nightmare, but also of the bad guy from Black Cauldron, that sort of character. But now it looked like space. And the main guy wasn't, he wasn't carrying around a cape and a sword. Now he had a lightsaber or something. And the logo was all written in neon lights and it was all futuristic and stuff. And sweet, that's really cool. So I got that but I didn't know what had been going on. So I couldn't keep up with it. I wasn't reading it. And so I slipped away from it again. But the thing that was so good about it, though, was the interactivity, the fact that it came in this folder, the paintings, the cards, the hunting for things on every page. And then you got to the end and there were all these things to do, like, did you spot this? Find this? Go back and work this out. Yeah, it was really cool. I don't know if that counts as a Partworks, but it sort of does a bit. There you go.
I kind of remember seeing it in a newsagent's.
All right.
I think I just walked past it because, like you say, I probably just took the wrong impression of what it actually was. Yeah. And hearing all that kind of makes me feel bad because it sounds amazing, and I think it was something I probably would have really enjoyed.
It was quite funny you should say that, Jason, because I was having a conversation with my wife before we started recording, and I mentioned that the subject was like comic books and Partworks. Uh-huh. And this is a story that I have to tell people because it's just hilarious. When she was a kid, there was this Partwork called something about gnomes or something like that.
Oh yeah, Wisdom of the Gnomes. It came with
you know it. Oh my god.
Yeah. When you've said that, when you've told us about this, I'm going to tell you something about that. Go on.
when she was a kid, she thought it was going to be like a fantasy type thing, about dwarves and gnomes and the kind of the whole Nordic fascination with like gnomes and dwarves that like live in forests and caves and stuff.
Yeah.
So she got her mum to subscribe to it. Issue 1 came along and she thought, oh, maybe this issue's about gardening. And then issue 2 and 3, it was about gardening.
No.
Oh, she told me the story and I lost my shit. And I was in the kitchen. I was like, this has to be told.
Well,
she said she remembers this disappointment when she realised it was a horticultural artwork and not a fantasy artwork.
How gutting.
Well, let me tell you about that. If it's the thing I'm thinking of, if it is the Wisdom of the Gnomes or the Book of the Gnomes, or what
it is that one. It's got Snow White on the cover of the first issue.
Has it? Well, it might not be then, because that sounds like a different thing. Because what I'm thinking of does fit a lot of the descriptions that you've just given, but it wasn't about like, oh no, like, because that's dwarves, isn't it? Snow White. That's like, oh, here is the whole.
That was the thing when I said to her when she found it on eBay, and I was like, but that's dwarves. That's an entirely different thing.
Yeah.
And she found an issue on eBay or a Google image search, and it did have Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs on the cover.
Huh. I wonder what that was then. Because so it's probably just not. What I was thinking of, which is a Partworks, so hey, why don't I just tell you about it, is The Wisdom of the Gnomes, and that was a tie-in with a cartoon series about gnomes, which itself was based on this old book. And David, you've heard of David the Gnome, surely?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he was one of the gnomes. David the Gnome and Wisdom of the Gnomes there were 2 different series that both spun off from this book, which is
I had no idea they were related.
Yeah, well, you would have done if you'd have put them on. They're exactly the same as each other.
Suppose, yeah.
But they are. I don't know what country in Europe made both of those cartoons, but I think the book was German, and it was maybe it was an Austrian cartoon, maybe it was an Austrian book. Anyway, and it's just this book that somebody wrote ages ago, and it's a classic. You still get it now. I haven't got it, but I really want it. And it is about like here's what the life of gnomes is like. Here's how they live. Here's all the details of their lives. And so then they made these 2 cartoon series, one about just this gnome whose job it is, David the Gnome, his job is, I think, just to go around doing nature stuff. And, it was like a bit, this was around the time of your Captain Planets and things like that. So this was a bit conservationist. And then Wisdom of the Gnomes was about a gnome judge who came up against all of these issues where, like, probably somebody was doing something analogous to human pollution and he had to put a stop to it, but I can't actually remember. But it's that sort of thing. And then they started bringing out this Partwork where they took the Book of the Gnomes and they released it as the Book of the Gnomes, and it was cut up into loads of little hardbacks that each came, 1 per issue, and you put them together on your shelf and it would say the Book of the Gnomes. And and I really wanted it, and it came also with little figures of the characters from the show, and I really, really wanted this. And I never got it. I think I might have had 2 of them or something. And they came... The way that they did it wasn't just the book cut up. It was... I don't even know if it had any of the contents of the book. I think it did. I think it had a couple of pages. But mostly it was about, okay, here's how the gnomes do the gardening. And so you'd have this little hardback book about how to do the gardening. And it was about these gnomes. But it was tied in with this cartoon, so it wasn't just about gardening, and I don't think it had a Snow White on the cover. I think it had maybe this was a different tie-in comic with that. I bet this it might have been, actually. I remember there being one thing where I had an unfoldable what do I mean, like a 4-page fold out in the middle of some comic or something, where you would collect the big white puffy round stickers and stick them in the right places on this thing.
Oh, yeah.
So that might have just been a comic. But the Book of the Gnomes thing was the Partworks that I really wanted. And here's what I was saying that I was going to tell you about it. Was that so last year we went on holiday, me and my family, to where is it? Town in the UK that has 2 different ways of pronouncing it, and even the locals pronounce it both different ways depending on which side of the river they live on. Not Shropshire. I think it starts with an S. Well, anyway, it might not even start with an S. But anyway, there's this town in the UK, in England somewhere, that we went to Was it in England? Could have been in Wales. And there was a little boat tour that you could go on, a little canal boat, and you would just go up and down the canal or river or whatever it was. And then when you got back, it would stop, same place you got on, but it was just across from this a restaurant that's sort of like an American type Tex-Mex type place. So you're going to get burgers and chips with all sorts of things on them and ribs and things. And we went there to eat, and I went into the loo there, and they had, on the way into the loo, a stocked bookshelf. And I'm like, wow, there's no secret about what we're supposed to do with these books, is there? It's very clear what these are for. And I had a little look. I was like, okay, all right, what do you got? What do you got for me? And they had flipping loads of episodes of the Book of the Gnomes. Loads! I've never seen any! And they had loads, like about 20 of them or something. They had flipping loads. I thought when I first saw it on the shelf, I was like, is that a complete collection? And it wasn't, but it was loads. And I really wanted to just be like, listen, can I have these? Can I just have these? Because you don't care what is on this shelf. Do you want? I'll come back with other books. Do you want these?
That's one of those lovely stories of a collector who's been looking for this one thing for decades and goes into a random pub and there it is.
Oh, mate, let me tell you a story like that.
That's great.
Let me tell you a story like that. This is not relevant. You may cut this out of the episode if you want. Do you remember the Maid Marian books?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Vaguely.
Yeah, they were brilliant comics. We'd call them comics or we'd call them graphic novels today. Both of those titles are completely wrong. They were books, but they were comics and they were by Paul Kennick. A brilliant... they are... It's Maid Marian and Her Merry Men, if you don't know, the sitcom, the CBBC sitcom by Tony Robinson, who was also in it, blah, 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 about Maid Marian, and it was a reimagining of Robin Hood. And these books came out to tie in with it, which were just adaptations of episodes in comic form. And they couldn't have been better than... There was absolutely no way they could have possibly... There was no way the TV series could have been better, and there was no way that the comics, the tie-in books, could have been better either. And whenever a new one... Whenever there was a birthday or a Christmas or whatever, either me or my dad would have one of these, and we built up our collection. Except Rabies in Love. That was the only one. Rabies was one of the characters. One of the Merry Men was called Rabies, and there was this.
That was a big actor, wasn't it? Who played that character?
It was the guy. Oh,
reddish hair.
He was from Brushstrokes, I believe.
That was it. Yeah.
I just know him from Maid Marian.
Yeah.
He's dead now. He died recently and under unfortunate circumstances. Actually, it's actually really sad. I think it was that he ended up getting put in a home that was mistreating him or something. I don't know. Or that may be alleged and isn't true. So nobody tell us off for saying that, but that you can look that up. But anyway,
answers on a postcard, maybe, Joe.
But that was his. Anyway, that was what he claimed, and I think someone was claiming that no, they weren't, and he was just, he was addled because he was old. So it was one of those things. Who knows? Anyway, but he in an episode falls in love with Fergie. The Fergie from the royal family, that Fergie, but it was but a joke version, because there was a lot of odd pop culture references in Maid Marian. Tony was just having his own fun.
Very well, by the sounds of things.
And so that was the book that I didn't have, right? And one day in my adult life, 10 years ago maybe, I was with my family on another week in a town somewhere in the UK. We do one every year. And this was, I believe, Hay on Wye. I'm not sure if that's the case. Stuart Jipp recently told me that it was when I described the town to him. And I think Hay on Wye is what he said. Otherwise, the name simply wouldn't be in my head. But for anyone who, like Stuart, knows these sorts of things, the thing about this town is that it's a bookshop town. Almost to the point where it is literally a town of bookshop. So I remember walking down cobbled streets and there were heaps of books just outside, just piled up against shops and stuff. That's the kind of town that it is. And
did you say Y or Rye?
WYE, why?
There's a small village town not so far out of Faversham called Wye that I used to go to a fair bit with friends.
Well, I guess this would be a river Wye, would it, if it has something on it?
Yeah, it might be,
it
yeah.
would be, yeah.
Yeah. Didn't think about that. Sorry.
Well, it's in Wales, so if you're not in Wales, it's not.
Oh, nowhere near there.
Here we go. Visiting a bookshop town. We visited Hay-on-Wye, a town with 20 bookshops. So, yeah. So, and sure enough, my mum had explained to me that this is going to be like this, and there's bookshops all over this flipping town. And yeah, sure enough, we get there, and we're in this random little place, and there's no foot traffic on this road, but there are 3 visible bookshops just within eyeshot, with books all outside them, heaped up everywhere. It was amazing. And it's the sort of town where you can be at the corner of two, what do I mean? You can be standing at the end of 2 roads that go off in the same direction, parallel to each other, but one's high up and one's low down, and there's houses between that you have to go up funny stairs to get to. It's that sort of layout of town. It's flipping, I love those. And I think I'm exaggerating, but anyway. So we were like, oh, okay, and I'm like, oh, well, what? I wonder what I'll find here, because it's all second-hand stuff. Is there anything I actually want second-hand? And as we're walking along, my mind just goes to this, like, well, I never got that one missing Maid Marian book. Like, wouldn't that be interesting if I could find this here? And we walk into bookshop number 1. And not only do they have Rabies in Love, but that is the only Maid Marian book they have, and it's the only one I see in the entire town all day.
That's mad.
I don't know how that happened, but I am 80% of the way to believing that I went into a magic shop. Like a proper magic shop that manifested the thing I wanted. And had wanted for a couple of decades or however long it had been. Like, I can't believe it. So now I've got the complete collection of Maid Marian books.
See, I often do that with charity shops and flea markets, because
I need to go to more of that stuff.
Yeah, like, it's not like where your mum would go to charity shop and look at dresses and shoes and shit. Like,
right.
And it's more along lines of, like, I want to go into one charity shop and find a first edition copy of Jurassic Park hardback with white cover, dust sheet with the T-Rex silhouette, right? You can find them on eBay, scalpers. You're like, one day I want to walk into a bookshop and it's going to be there.
Yeah.
And I do the same with things I've had as a kid that I would like now, like, as a memory, or things that I never had. And you see people post on internet discussion boards or Twitter, and you're like, you found all of that in a charity shop for 15 quid.
Yeah.
And you're like, that never happens to me.
No, never.
This guy found...
but that's because we're not going to stuff... That's because we're not going to the Hay-on-Wye of charity shops.
No. And me, of all people, on the Isle of Wight, it's just like, there's nothing here but charity shops. There's nothing turns up in them.
Yeah, but that's because on the Isle of Wight there's a limited pool of objects.
Exactly. Exactly.
That are just cycling around the different charity shops.
Yeah. And it's just it's just nuts, because, like, was it someone put up, he found like a hoard of, like, unopened model kits, but it wasn't, what was it? It was like Space 1999 from the 70s or some claptrap like that. And someone replied and said, do you realise what you just found? And then he linked him to an eBay listing for a similar kit. Just one kit of one of the Eagles from, I'm sure it's Space 1999. Yeah. Just one kit on eBay was selling for like 70 to 100 quid. Because they're vintage and they're rare. And this guy found like a whole box of them in a charity shop. And he's like, that never happens to me.
No, never.
I'd love to wander in and find something like that, but
we've got to get to some more charity, because I don't even do it. I don't look, because I do, when I go past a charity shop, I look at it and it's like, well, there's a load of, like you said, a load of old dresses. Yeah. And then I'll wander in and flip through the records, but there's never anything I'm even vaguely interested in.
No.
I need to pay more attention. I need to go in more.
Yeah,
because it must be there.
My first direction is to the video games, and it's always FIFA.
Yeah. Your first what is to the video games?
It's my first section in a charity shop.
Right.
That's where I go straight first. to find the video games, because I always see on Twitter, oh, look what I found in a charity shop for 50p and everything else. And I go, right,
Panzer Dragoon Saga for 20p or whatever.
Yeah. And this is my turn now. I'm going to walk into this charity shop, and I'm going to find something for like £1 that's worth 200 quid, some kind of like Castlevania game or something.
Yeah, you say that, Jason, but I did that about 10 years ago or so. No, not that long ago. And it was a copy of From Russia With Love on the Xbox. And I found it, I can't remember what it was, at a CEX store or something like that, and it was like $1.99. I was like, that'll play on the 360. And it said 360 compatible. I looked it up when I bought it, got it home, and it never worked. It just was not compatible, and I updated the Xbox 360, everything. Still on my shelf.
Maybe that was the problem.
Never played
Perhaps
it.
they patched it out.
That was my first thing, because when I looked it up and everyone was saying, oh yeah, it's compatible, it works fine, and it never did. Yeah. But similar story, isn't it? It's like, you finally find it, you've never played it, you still can't.
Yeah.
That's a really sad story. I'm so sorry, mate.
Yeah.
I had that game on the game.
I've seen plenty of people play it.
Yeah, I had that game on the GameCube. It was all right.
It's one of those rites of passage, wasn't it, where Bond fan and Sean Connery comes back to do the voice in a video game. You're like, what? What? Yeah. I don't own an Xbox. I'm too poor. Oh dear. Oh,
brilliant.
Such is life.
Yeah, such is life. Brilliant. Well, I think that's all the time we got for this show. Unless there's anything else anyone wants to bring up.
I'm good. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah,
actually more than I thought we would.
I tend whenever I guest on a podcast, it tends to end up usually about an hour longer than it normally is, because I go on and on.
But it's been an absolute blast having you on, Dave. I mean, I've smiled the entire time that we've been recording, and the time's just flown by. So.
Because what you can't see on Sonic the Comic the podcast is we're actually just scowling at each other the whole time.
Brilliant. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and spending your evening with us. Been an absolute pleasure, mate.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all right. I've got another evening tomorrow. Yeah, no problem.
Just tell the good people where they can find your work, mate.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm Demon Tomato Dave on Twitter, and that's where I sit most of the day, spending most of our time. So you'll see me post everything else I do there. But in terms of things that I make that you could go and have a look at right now, do hop to my YouTube channel, which is Demon Tomato Dave. There's at least one video there that you'll be interested in if you listen to this, which is the Dave's first game video. That's the one I mentioned earlier, where I tell people what it felt like to be a kid in the thrall of a ZX Spectrum. It's called Dave's first game, and I've pinned it. You'll find it. There's a couple of other things on there you might be interested in, and but I've got two podcasts. I've got Sonic the Comic the podcast, and you can find that by just looking for that. And then the other one I've got is called Serious Disness, which I do with another friend of mine called Jahan Ranasingh, who is clever at talking about films. And so what we've set out to do together is we have been re-evaluating, or, well, not re-evaluating, because it's the first time we saw most of them, but evaluating those awful Disney live-action remakes they've been doing for the last several years. Well, we thought that we didn't want to approach them in a kind of like, oh, look at this rubbish, like, dunking way. And instead, we thought we'd actually give them the benefit of the doubt and give them the time and treat them as films and, you know, review them in that way. And so there actually are a couple that we think are quite good. And then when we hit the ones that aren't good, we do not hold back. I'm particularly fond of our 2-part Beauty and the Beast remake special that we released last Christmas, which is just quite involved, and because we know a lot about the old films, and so we go into some detail about how this connects to that and that connects to this, and what bits came from the Broadway version and this and that. And I think, and also we're just generally very angry about that, so that might entertain some people. But we did 6 episodes just about Frozen. We do silly things as well, and there's a extensive Honey, I Shrunk the Kids episode and things like this. So yeah, I think you'll quite enjoy that. That's called Serious Disness, Disness, and Sonic the Comic the podcast, and Demon Tomato Dave on YouTube and Twitter. And that is where you will find me. I'm stalling because I feel as if I've forgotten something. Never mind, you'll find it there, whatever it is. You'll find it on my Twitter or wherever.
I did discover your Serious Business podcast only today. And I listened to the Lion King episode that you did.
Oh yes.
And actually, it was really interesting because I didn't really, when I saw the film, I guess I didn't really look at it in the way in which you guys looked at it in.
Right.
But it was fascinating to look at it in the way that you did, with like how the lions behave in like real life and how they did that in the film.
Oh yes. We have something of a lions expert on that episode who's just really into lions and tells us about how their subtle acting actually does line up with what real lions do and so on.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's an interesting film. It's not an enjoyable film.
No.
But it's a very interesting one.
Yeah. It made me appreciate the work that they did put into that film more so than I did beforehand.
Yeah.
So it's really quite a good podcast to listen to bring that more appreciation out of these live action films that they're doing.
That's the hope. The hope is that we're interesting. What we didn't expect was that we'd be funny, but I think we are. There's quite a lot of quite funny episodes of Serious Business. Yeah, it's a good laugh. It's a good podcast.
Yeah, no, definitely highly recommend anyone going out there and finding it and giving it a go. It's really interesting. So.
Cheers.
Well, next time we finally hit the movies of 1996, so look out for that in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you to everyone listening. You are all wonderful people for doing so, and please come and visit the wolfiepod.com website. Our supporter Tristan put a lot of work into that, and we're all quite proud of it, so go and check that out.
Indeed.
You can also hear me and Rich talk video games with Andrew and Steve on the Dreamcast Years podcast, and I can also be found over at the Cross Players. You can find those on Twitter at Dreamcast Years and at the Cross Players. You'll also find a Linktree link in the show notes, which contains all our links, including our website, Twitter handles, and more. Any final words, Rich or Chris?
No, I'm good.
No, I don't think I've got anything to add.
No? Any final words, Dave, before we leave?
Don't think so.
Excellent. Well,
apart from what's your favourite off-brand Lidl product?
Oh God,
of course. Yeah. Yes. How could I forget?
How could we forget? Come on, Dave. What's your favourite Lidl off-brand?
I don't know because
product?
I've never been to a Lidl.
No.
It's never happened.
You've never cracked open a nice can of Professor Peppy?
I've never been. I keep meaning to, because there's one that's just nearby, and I'm like, I'll go to that Lidl. But it's just far away enough that I would have to drive to it, and I don't know the way, really. So, no, I've never been.
Well, we look forward to the podcast when you finally do.
When I finally, yes. I'll have to start a new Lidl exclusive podcast, because I'll be so excited.
Yes.
I've been to one IKEA once, but I've never been to Lidl.
Just as bad as each other.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, well, my name's been Jason, and you've been listening to What's Wrong with Wolfie, a 90s podcast to the max. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, Janelle. What's wrong with Wolfie? I can hear him barking.